Feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Welcome back to another episode of the Shrimp Tank, coming to you virtually from Seattle, the PNW, and again today from north of the border. Listen, if you want to learn how to start, grow, or run a successful business, this right here is the podcast for you. This is where we say street smarts and book smarts collide. I don't know if there's any insurance involved in those collisions. I don't know that that's true, but they collide and good things happen. Hello again, everyone. I'm Dan Whedon, and my co-host today from up north, Phil Simchich. Welcome, Phil. Our guest today is David Weaver of David Weaver Coaching. David is a successful entrepreneur and business owner. He's been coaching and teaching individuals, groups, and companies. David is known for his ability to connect, to make the complex simple, and to help people make lasting changes. He specializes in helping business owners create both a business and a life they love. I know there's people who love their business, they love their life, and the two need to come together, right, David? His favorite question to ask is, what makes you alive? David, welcome. We'll be with you in just a second. Everybody, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. That's iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and YouTube. I like to say it, we are ubiquitous. We come to you from about a dozen cities, including the mothership in Atlanta, Boston, Boca Raton, Charleston. We've got a couple new ones up and about in Columbus and Knoxville. Now, before we bring on David, hello, Phil.
Hello, Dan.
Phil, Plead the Fifth. What makes you feel alive?
Great question. It was minus 30 something this morning when I woke up. So I know what makes my car feel alive, at least the one that's not plugged in, that's not in the garage. So the one that's outside needs to be plugged in. These are not electric cars. These are cars that we plug in
to the battery, right?
Heater.
Yeah.
And it's so cold, we've even given the cars a battery blanket. So it's like a hot water bottle for the battery to keep the battery warm. So what makes my car feel alive is being plugged in. Me, now that I've had 30 more seconds to think about it, a couple things would make me and do make me feel alive. Getting outside in the sunshine so we can handle the cold when it's nice and sunny like it is today. And definitely spending time on my hobbies, which would be photography or kayaking. So getting outside, doing things, and looking at the world through really a different perspective rather than just staring at our Zoom screens like we're privileged to do. And then either learning something or creating something. So Dan, you and I both like to write, and so writing is definitely an outlet to make something tangible. And my latest hobby is cooking. And apparently I'm getting pretty good because everybody else has stopped cooking and just looks at me when it's supper time. So there
now
you
listen,
go.
is it the same in your family? If you cook, you don't have to do the dishes. Is that the way it works?
Well, that is a general rule, but for the last couple days, it has not been followed. So the cook is thinking of going on strike, but we'll see.
There you go. There you go. Then they'll cook, and then you still have to do the dishes. Well, I'm going to ask Dave in a second, but I it's funny when that popped up. I mean, I can answer, my wife and my grandchildren, my children make me feel alive, which they do. But the other day, Phil, I was playing golf last Friday, and I hit a on a par five. I hit a 5-iron, 166 yards away. Felt great, hit a great shot. And as I started walking, I realized how close I was. I was 3 inches away, little tap in birdie. That made me feel alive. That was a lot of fun. Now, I did double bogey the next hole. I had a little problem there. I was probably thinking about the birdie I had, but that's what keeps me coming back to playing golf. David Weaver, we're done talking. We got to talk to you. You started this whole banter with the great question you ask on your website. So I'm going to ask you to get things started. What makes David Weaver feel alive?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So there's quite a few things. I'll give a couple. One of them is this thing called splitboarding. Have you heard of it before?
No.
Okay, so it's backcountry skiing with a snowboard. So
Oh.
it's cut in half, just like a skis, so you can skin uphill in the mountains and climb the mountains and then snowboard down. That makes me feel alive. It's super fun. I love it. Another thing is when that light bulb moment happens with a client and something that they didn't realize before suddenly just clicks, and then it changes everything for them. That is one of my favorite things for sure. And then also I love to write music. And so that process of like going through all of that to having like a finished product, I'll stay up all night if I get really hooked on an idea. And that's definitely in the flow, fully alive sort of moment for me.
All right, David. So, in your coaching, and a lot of our audience is small, medium business owners and entrepreneurs, and you are one. And so, when it comes to growing their businesses, what do you see as the top challenges that they struggle with? And not just in the last couple of years, because we're all dealing with that, but even before that, what are the really big challenges that are often holding them back?
A lot of it is they're in their own head. They're getting in the way. And there's a lot of stuff that maybe we picked up somewhere in the past or from parents or from who knows where, but there's this a lot of limiting beliefs that we're walking around with that, oh, like I can't do that, or no, like, or even just like the hustle culture, you know, where like we got to grind it out, we got to work super hard. And of course, there's some level of that is, of course, true. We do have to work hard, but they don't feel like they could actually, if they found a way to work easier and make it like, oh yeah, I could just do this and that, and then I would only have to work this much, and then that would help this grow. Like there's a limiting belief there that's kind of blocking them out because they don't feel like they deserve that. So there's there's a lot of head stuff that's going on out there that I feel like is the bulk of what's holding people back, not actual like practical things that they're doing, but what they think.
You know, and I would not disagree with you. I think you're spot on, which leads me to a question though. These people that you're talking, people who you coach, have found success, right? They've found success at some level. They've either started a business, they're an executive, maybe, however that looks. They found success. What is it, whether it's human nature or whatever, what is it that takes somebody who has seen and experienced that success? What is it that continues to bring these limiting beliefs and self-doubt?
That's a great question. I think, you know, a lot of entrepreneurs are hard drivers, go-getters, and they're constantly looking at the future. I know that was me for sure, like a huge portion of my entrepreneurial career, and just I think kind of just how I was wired younger. And so we get stuck in this like always looking to the future and then never allowing for like success and gratitude of everything that we have already created, right? And so it can create this like high level of stress and unhappiness because we're always looking ahead and judging ourselves on how we can constantly be better. And so I think that is part of the issue that comes up with entrepreneurs.
And so if we're always looking ahead, are we not enough in the present, or are we ignoring the past? Are we not reflecting? What's the gap there?
Yeah, that's great. You said The Gap. Have you guys read The Gap and the Gain? It's a good book. If anybody wants to read it, Benjamin Hardy wrote it. He's a psychologist and talks about this exact thing where we're looking ahead and we're not measuring success by what we've achieved in the past. And so, yeah, we're not actually really being present ever. A lot of times we're like even, I'm sure you guys have experienced this before where you're playing with your kids and they want your attention and you're playing with them and you're trying really hard to be there with them, but you're just not. You're like, I got this and that, and you know, and so we have a hard time really being grounded in the present, and sometimes even like looking to the past and being grateful for what we have achieved. And so that's not to say that we shouldn't look ahead, right? Of course, we have to plan ahead, we have to look to the future, we have to make sure that we're continuing to stay focused and go in the right direction. But if we only live there, we're robbing ourselves of the only thing we actually have, which is right now. Like we only have right now, me talking to you guys right now. This is the only thing guaranteed.
So it's interesting that this conversation came up today, just today, this morning. I was listening to a podcast where former Seahawks quarterback Matt Hasselbeck was being interviewed regarding where the Seahawks are. And he said, he talked about the concept of being where your feet are. He said, instead of trying to win like 3 Super Bowls, how about we just make a first down? How about we just focus right now on this play? And he talked about really being in the present, but being where your feet are. So I'm going to ask you this, David. What do you do specifically with your clients? You've noticed this, you've found it, you've identified it. They hear you, they say, yep, you're exactly right. But taking it from, yep, you're right, to change is difficult. You need a coach like you. What are some of the things that you do to help your clients be where their feet are?
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the first things that I always start with is limiting beliefs. Most of us have them to some degree. Some of them are really, really deep. And so that, I think if we don't start there, we're just putting Band-Aids on stuff, which is why I think a lot of times we fail to make the progress that we want or to make the change that we want, because we're not going deep enough. We're just doing this like surface level stuff. And so, for example, I have this client and we're working through some of this limiting belief stuff, and she realizes through the process that she hasn't had really great quality relationships, failed marriages, has had a hard time with that her entire life. And no judgment to anybody. But it's been a struggle for her to have like deep, long-lasting quality relationships in her life. And she realized through these limiting beliefs that it was because of some stuff that happened with her mom back sometime in her early life, right? And so I walk her through this process of forgiveness of self, for judging herself for all of these things that she's been judging herself for all of these years. And she begins to let go of that. And the crazy thing is the universe loves to help us out. And she gets a call. So she hasn't talked to her mom in 10 years. It's been a decade. And since she hasn't talked to her mom in 10 years, we do this process. And then she gets a call and her mom's like, hey, I'm in the hospital. I'm not doing so well. And so I was like, okay, what are you going to do? Like, text me later in the week when you get that plane ticket. And so 2 days later, I get a text. She sends me, she bought her plane ticket. She went out. And so she got to sit down with her mom and talk to her for the first time in a decade. And had we not kind of gone through this process, she wouldn't have been in a position where she was willing to even go do that. But she had made this shift, sat down with her mom. She said, hey, listen, Mom, I don't want to worry about any of this anymore. I want to move forward. And she said she could just see the guilt like melt off of her mom. And to me, like that's like getting at the root, right? That's like the most important thing. You're like, what? You hired a business coach and you just worked on this limiting belief and forgiveness stuff and things with your mom. And like, how does that affect your business? But it does. It's all intertwined. It's not like this separate stuff, because now how she's showing up in the world, having let go of some of this stuff, allows her now to have better communication with her employees and like her kids, and everything else in her life is affected by that. And she gets to create some healing with her mom, which I think is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, that's a great story about connecting with important relationships like our parents. What are some other ways that entrepreneurs can take better care of themselves today, now in the current reality?
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys have talked about this on the podcast before, but this like deficiency versus abundance mindset, right? I'm sure you have. I'm sure you guys have talked about this before. But one of the ways that I like to do that is to be really active with gratitude. And so little stuff, like I'll write in my journal in the morning, like I am thankful for my office. I'm thankful for this hot coffee, like just this little thing. So I'm setting my mind first thing in the morning, like, hey, I'm grateful to be here today. This is a gift. Another day is a gift. So I think that has a huge impact. And if you take it a step further, though, where people are really good at like, I'm grateful for the good stuff, right? But what about the challenge that came up yesterday? If we can look at that and be grateful for that hard thing that we went through, and allow it to teach us and have curiosity about it instead of it just being this like oppressive, difficult thing that we're trying to get free of, that's where the real power comes. So, if we take COVID, for example, and we're like, I'm at home, I'm feeling isolated. Well, how can we create gratitude for the things that have happened as a result of that? We always have an option to choose how we're going to see things.
Well, we have to choose how we see things moving forward, look into the future, and pay some bills. We're going to take a short break right now to hear from today's Spotlight sponsor. And when we come back with our guest, David Weaver, for a Hot or Not section of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about virtual coaching. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank.
Would you like to grow your business, increase revenues, and raise profits? Would more financing from your banker help you grow? Who is guiding your succession plan? Would you like more control over your business so you sleep better at night? SME Business Wealth Builder works with business leaders and owners like you to help them grow their business and build their business wealth. For more information and to check out free resources, go to SMEwealthbuilder.com.
All right, welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm Phil Simchich, and our guest today is David Weaver for our next segment, Hot or Not.
David, this is where Phil and I are going to pepper you with questions about business, about life, about a whole bunch of different things, maybe even split boarding. I don't know. But at the end, you win absolutely nothing, but let's hope you have some fun with it. I mentioned virtual coaching, so I'll just start off. Hot or not, David, virtual coaching.
Yeah, I love virtual coaching. It's how I do all of my coaching with my clients. I think it's very cool that we can connect with people all across the country and the world and help them make life change.
And I agree with you. Let me just ask this. So a lot of people, and you may find this, I still talk to people who say, gosh, I gotta be sitting at least across the table from you, even though as we look at each other, it looks like we are sitting across the table and we're all in different places. Do you ever run across people who object to that? And if you do, how do you respond?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I think it if you really listen well and you show that you care, it doesn't matter where you're at.
I agree.
So entrepreneurs are continual learners, and often they'll read books, and whether it's business books or self-help books. But from the coaching side, how useful or valuable are self-help books?
I think it depends on just where you're at. And so I think of coaching as like there's a lot of tools and principles and ideas that I can use and pull from. So it's always valuable to like, if you pick up a new tool, if maybe you just pick up one thing from a self-help book, but it's really useful for this particular person, then it's worth it. So I think that we can always be students and always be learning from anything.
Well, speaking of that, I'm going to ask you on the hot or not, which one is hotter? Because they're both probably at least lukewarm. Which one's hotter, street smarts or book smarts?
I think street smarts. Yeah,
Why?
I wish.
And by the way,
Yeah,
you're in
I
the
wish-
majority of the people we asked that question. I think the poll is about 100%. People kind of do the same thing. They take a deep breath because they know what they but what makes street smarts for an entrepreneur, business owner? What is that street smart aptitude that is so important?
Because like it's all about you and how you're thinking and who you're being. And so you can learn some of that in a book, but it's more the street smarts, like the emotional intelligence and the being able to communicate with people that has to be done in the real world. You can learn about it all you want, but if you don't do it, experience it, get better at it, and it just doesn't matter. And so many times I've gone and had to learn stuff and had to unlearn it, like from school or a book or whatever. I'm like, well, that doesn't work. So yeah.
So if street smarts trumps the self-help books, just to tie a couple questions together, What about group coaching and leveraging the street smarts of others, hot or not?
I think it can be really valuable. I think there are pluses and minuses to one-on-one versus group in both categories, but the opportunity to get in a group of other people and be heard and then share because some of what you get to do in the group is to share with others where you might not share just in a one-on-one coaching, where your coach, kind of helping you out, but you get to like give some of your wisdom to that person in the group. I think there's value in that.
I'm going to take a step back, David. We've talked a lot about coaching and how you can help people, but leads me to wonder, how the heck did you get into this to begin with? What was your entrepreneurial journey? Where did it start? What got you to where you are today?
Yeah. So I didn't realize this when it first happened, but it definitely was a result of seeing my dad work in corporate America. And, he's okay. He didn't like hate his job, but definitely not enjoying his job. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to do something where I really like what I'm doing. And that's then kind of where the start of that, what makes you feel alive? Like, okay, what would make me feel alive that I could do in the world, that I could get paid for, I can help people. And so the first part of that was my wife and I opened a personal training facility. So I was working at an engineering company. I was in the IT department, great job, good people, bored out of my mind. I was like, technology, IT is not for me. And so we're like, well, what happens if we were to open our own place? And we were able to do that. It was a really cool situation where it was kind of around, it was around like 2007 when things were kind of falling apart. And so I was able to just kind of go down to part-time and more part-time. And as I was building this company on the side, and my boss knew I didn't like the job there, and he was super supportive of me doing that. So it was really fortunate and cool, less risky way than just jumping in all the way. And then so that's what started. And we did that for 8 years and got to help a whole bunch of people do all kinds of cool stuff, like reverse type 2 diabetes, not go on kidney dialysis, lose 100 pounds, play with their grandkids, play basketball again. All the stuff is like quality of life.
So those people that went through those dramatic changes, is motivation the key? Is like external motivation from working with a trainer, or where does that come from?
That's a good question. I just posted about this on LinkedIn. So I think that there has to be an internal commitment. And when you make that decision, so for example, can I tell a story in this part?
Please. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Cool. So when we had the personal training facility, I had a client who was so committed. This is still the most inspiring story. She decided, like, I'm all in. She made a commitment, made a decision that I haven't really seen anybody else do like this before. She sold her car. So you guys know we're all in Seattle. Can you imagine driving or riding your bike? So she decided, I'm going to ride my bike everywhere because I'm not being active enough. I'm going to ride my bike. So she would ride her bike to work in the dark in the morning in December when it's 34 and raining. Horrible. And then she would,
for Phil, by the way. I'm just going to tell you that's warm for Phil and Regina, Saskatchewan. Please continue. I'm sorry.
Studded tires on my bike for the snow. Anyways.
Nice. Love it. Yeah. So she'd do that. Then she'd go to work all day. She had like a toxic work environment. It was tough. And then she would, when she's done working, it's dark again. So then she would drive to my facility. I would have her do a hard workout, and she would finish that and then ride home. And so she did that, and she committed. She put everything into it, and she lost 100 pounds. You could see like that sparkle in her eye. Like when she walk in the room, you're like, oh, she's up to something. You better watch out. And it just like completely transformed her life. And then she was like leading groups of cyclists on the weekends. And then she quit that job and found a job that was not toxic. And just like seeing that level of commitment in somebody is so cool. So to answer your question, were there lots of days where she wasn't motivated to do any of that? Yes, for sure. But when you make a commitment like that, and then you have some level of accountability and community to help you on those days when you don't feel like it, I think that's a really made a big difference.
So let me ask about motivation then. I don't know if Phil feels the same way, but at least in my experience, motivation comes from generally one of two things that moves the needle. One is fear of something bad happening, whether it be health related or whatever, fear, and then joy. I mean, just that, that whatever that reward is, and it's not anywhere in like the middle, like, yeah, it'd be nice. No, it's like real joy. So fear and joy, there's a big gap in those. I guess I'd say, which one tends to be hotter in moving that needle? Is it the fear side or is it the joy side?
Well, in my experience, in my work, it's the fear side that gets people to finally decide to do something else because they're just done. They're finished. They don't want to do it that way anymore. But then what I want to do with them is to help show you that the more powerful way and more inspiring way is from joy. Like, if you guys seen the scale of consciousness before?
No.
No? Okay. It's thinking of that abundance versus contraction. So expanded, contract. So at the fear is very close to the bottom. It's like fear, shame, guilt. So they're like way down on the bottom on the scale of consciousness and like our ability to be creative and open and expand. And joy is like way up at the top. So operating from that level, and I always say, having an ever expanding, compelling vision that's intrinsically inspiring you, that's the way to go, instead of operating out of fear of whatever.
So entrepreneurs are busy people. They're thinking about the future and trying to bust through the problems of the day to day. What advice do you have for them to get them more balance, happier, more joy in their life, and less heavy lifting on the shovel?
Yeah. So one of the biggest thing is just to decide to look at things differently, because we get to decide how we view everything, right? We have life happens, we experience that, and then we interpret that experience. So if we know that, and we're interpreting all this stuff as have tos, shoulds, obligation, all of that, there's a ton of freedom that can be created from just choosing to interpret that experience as something else. But then practically, and normally what happens is we design our life, it's like work, obligations, all these things, and then everything else is leftovers. And so one of the things that I do is I say, let's do that completely different. Let's flip that upside down. Let's look at your entire month and let's put what makes you feel alive as the top priorities. Those go on the calendar first. And then after that, what are the things that keep you healthy, give you good energy, make you perform your best? Those go on the calendar next, and then prioritizing work around these things, because that's one of the coolest things about being a business owner is there's nobody telling you what your schedule has to be. You can make your schedule whatever you want. And that is such a cool gift.
So I know you work with other than business owners, you've worked with groups, you've worked with companies, and I'm guessing that once in a while you're talking, it might be an executive of a company, somebody in a leadership position. I guess my first, do you work with people that are other than entrepreneurs? And if so, how do their needs and wants, do they differ at all?
Yes, I mostly focus on business owners. If somebody reached out and it was a really, really good fit in every other way, I would look at that. But yes, mostly business owners.
Okay.
And I do think that their needs are different. Their structures are a little bit different, because like what we just talked about, you can't, if you have a 9 to 5, there's only so much you can do to mess with that. You just have to do what your job requires of you and the hours require of you. And so it makes it a little bit more difficult to create your life by design.
So would you include somebody who's a CEO? They may not be the founder, they may not be the traditional owner of the company, but they've been brought in as a CEO. Would you put them in the same boat as an entrepreneur?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so if someone has change either thrust upon them or they're now ready for change, what are sort of the foundational things that they need to work on to change gears? So you talked about the side hustle that you did gradually, But if someone really doesn't have the time or luxury of a side hustle, how can they shift gears?
Yeah, I think it looks different for everyone, but the big question that besides what makes you feel alive that I ask everybody when I first sit down with them is, what would you love to create? And so I think identifying what that is, and sometimes people think that's like a creative thing, like painting, or no, just like, what would you love to create in your life? It's different than asking, what are your goals? Because so many of the times we make goals, they're maybe, yeah, we're inspired by some of them, but also there's probably some level of like should or expectation from outside sources on those things. But when you ask the question, what would I love to create? That's just you, and like, what would I like, to have happen? And so I think really identifying what it is the first step in making that change. And then you can go about like, okay, well, what's the strategy and all that? And of course that looks completely different from one person to another.
Well, we have hit our second commercial break, David. We're going to take that short break to hear from our sponsors. And when we come back with our guest, David Weaver, for our Plead the Fifth section of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about stress. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank.
Plead the Fifth is brought to you by our corporate sponsors, Ideal Life 360, Cornerstone Financial, First Underwriters Insurance, Kitsap Sun Newspaper, BC Fitness Studio, and the Upstart Group. Please visit our website at www.shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle to learn more about these terrific companies. Now back to the show.
Welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm co-host Phil Simchich, and our guest today is David Weaver for our next segment, Plead the Fifth.
And Plead the Fifth, David, we're going to turn up the heat maybe a little bit, ask you some more fun questions, and you get to plead the fifth, but only once. So be careful how you answer. And again, at the end, you win absolutely nothing. We'll have some fun. So we all know that stress is a killer in our bodies. I'm going to ask you to share maybe a story of you where you realized that stress was affecting you. How did it affect you? And what was the lesson you learned from that?
There are many examples. Thinking back to running the studio, like the emotional roller coaster of, people coming in, people going out, just a normal part of running that type of thing. I didn't know what I knew now. And so there was a lot of emotion and stress that happened with that. And then, go ahead.
Nope, sorry. I was letting Phil know I had a follow-up. So sorry about that. Keep going.
Cool. And then the other example is having kids, right? And so I don't know about for you guys, but my daughter's very high energy, the little one, very high energy, very strong-willed. And she would have these like epic tantrums. Like one time I tried to help her with her seatbelt, or my wife did or something, and she wanted to do it herself, and she threw a 2-hour tantrum. Like bloody murder screaming, like hitting me, like my worst life ever, like ridiculous, catastrophic, and so as you can imagine, that's like pretty upsetting when you're a newer parent and you like don't know what to do. And then, but coincidentally, during this time, I also started learning all this stuff about how we think and our emotions and all this. And so I remember one of the last times she threw a big tantrum, and she's grown up now, so it's not so, we don't really have them anymore, which is amazing. But I remember just the change that I had because I knew what I knew this time, and I just sat there with her. And I just held her and I just let her do her thing, because I know there's nothing that I can do that's going to make it better by being mad at her or being stressed out myself. And really, she just wants to know that I'm there and that I care. And like, in a little bit, she's gonna be like, I'm sorry, Dad, and everything's going to be fine. So I would say like learning about this stuff for parenting is like one of the most valuable things ever.
That's great advice. And we're all fathers of 2 daughters. I think that's one thing we all have in common here. So that's fun. But I want to ask you this, because we you touched on the stress part. people listening or watching this, there may be stuff that happens that they think is just part of everyday life and stress, but what are some of the consequences of stress that, and how are they manifested in people's health if they're not careful?
Yeah, so there's a few different distinctions, right? We have acute stress, we have chronic stress, and we have eustress. And so eustress you can think of as like, oh, I'm like a little anxious and excited because I got this new client coming in, and I'm not sure how it's going to go, but it's exciting. So that's like different than distress, regular stress. Acute stress is like the lion is attacking us, and so our bodies are made really well to deal with that, the eustress and the acute stress. But the day after day, constant chronic stress is we're not made to deal with that. And so that manifests in all sorts of like health issues that come down the road. And sometimes it takes a long time for them to come on. But yeah, there's like a laundry list of stuff. I actually wrote a list the other day.
So let's build on those two questions, because we're seeing adults in the workplace stressed, having tantrums, right?
Yeah.
And so what can people do who are feeling stressed on the verge or past the edge of the cliff? What can they do to reset in the moment?
Yes. So the biggest thing is if we can pause and be curious about it. So it's difficult, but if you can start doing that. So the thing happens, you feel yourself getting stressed out, worked up about it, and you notice it. If you can go, take a breath and go, that's interesting. I wonder why I'm so upset about this. That's the first step to making any sort of change. Because if we don't, then we're not going to be able to do anything about it if we don't first like take a look at it and then get curious about it.
Interesting thing before I go to my hot or my plead the fifth is I think people, we can logically all say exactly what you did. The hard part is the implementation of that. It sounds easy, but it's not. And that's why we need people like you. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a plead the fifth that I've been giving to all of our guests this year, and we're kind of chronicling and summarizing all of the answers. So I'm making you start a new career. You're starting a new business, but David, it's got to be based on a hobby. What's the new business? What's the hobby?
Man, see, it's a little tricky because I would say like maybe something in a mountain guide or something, because I've been climbing mountains for 20 years. So maybe that, just because I have expertise and familiarity in there. But at the same time, I've always said I don't want to make a career out of that, because that's something that I do just for me.
But as of right now, that's your answer. And we're going to stick with, okay.
Yeah.
You're a coach. Who's the most impactful coach that you've personally worked with, and what did you learn from them?
Yeah. So I've worked with a number of coaches, and I always tell people, like, I'm not preaching to the choir. Like, I hire my own coaches too. Excuse me. The most impactful coach that I ever had, his name is Alex, and he's the one that taught me so much about emotions and thinking and just all of that stuff. Like, I love all the practical stuff, but if you do this stuff, it takes care of a lot of the practical stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting, because life really happens in that 6-inch space between our ears, and the strategies and tactics of everyday living and business growth are a heck of a lot easier than that 6-inch mush stuff we got to deal with.
Yeah.
So, we talked about, we're all three here, girl dads, father, in fact, of two girls. And I have the two granddaughters now. And that gap in between, I forgot how much I learned from children. And so my granddaughters are 4 and almost 3. And I tell you, I learned something new from them all the time that I can implement somehow into my business. What's the last biggest takeaway that you got from your daughters, one of your daughters, that you can use in your business? What did you learn from them?
Ooh, that I learned that I can
maybe
use
the last one that pops to mind.
I feel like just their like we just intrinsically kind of know how to be a healthy, happy human when we're kids. And we messed that up somewhere along the way. And so just like observing, you know, how they're being and like how they spend their time and really what our biggest priorities are as humans. Like if I were to ask you guys, I'm gonna flip the question on you for just a second. What would you say that your grandkids or your kids' top 2 highest values are?
Their top 2 highest values. Number 1 is having fun. They absolutely, more than anything else, want to have fun. And I would say number 2 is having fun with someone else, with either each other or with they want to be connected.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. What about for you, Phil? Similar?
Yeah. So for one, it's definitely connection with others. She's a hugger and a talker, and her spirituality. And then for the other one, it's really so the creative one. It's much more of her having an outlet for her creativity so that she can contribute and help others.
Cool. Yeah. So in my observation, I would agree. I feel like similar to what you just said is like feeling loved, so that connection thing, and then play and having fun. And so I think for having that, taking that play and having fun thing, and if we can apply that into like, how could I actually just make this more fun? Like, what if this was just a really fun part of my business? And like asking that question, I think can really, really serve us. This is like a innate part of who we are, and we just don't give it that much attention anymore as we get older, for the most part. Some people are good about it, but most of us don't.
David, thank you so much for being a guest here on the Shrimp Tank. For our listeners that want to get in touch with you or learn more about your company and great coaching services, how can they get more information?
Yeah, thank you for having me. They can just go to davidweavercoach.com, and I've got my email address that's at the bottom there. Or if you want to just hop on a call with me, you can just schedule a calendar appointment with me as well.
Everyone, make sure you check out all the replays on shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle and wherever you get your podcasts, such as iHeart, Apple, Google, or Spotify. Please follow us on our show's social media pages on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
All right. Well, first of all, David, again, thank you for joining us. Phil, as always, great to see you. Everybody, listen up. You need to be on the Facebook page because that's where we live stream. And we live stream every Wednesday at 12 o'clock Pacific time, high noon. Our next show will be on Wednesday, January the 26th. Our guest will be Brooke Clark. Brooke is a studio photographer. Michelle Baumberger, who's our next co-host, knows her well. So we are excited to talk to Brooke next week. Everybody listen in the meantime, please be safe, be well, and be prosperous. And of course, like David said, let's have some fun, because until next week, the shrimp is back in the tank. So long.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond.